pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
New Jersey Open Public Meetings Law was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice of All right, let's try this again. The New Jersey Open Public Meeting Law was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice of and to attend the meeting of public bodies at which any business affecting their interests is discussed or acted upon. In accordance with the provisions of this act, the Cedar Grove Board of Education has caused notice of this meeting to be advertised by having the date, time, and place thereof posted on bulletin boards in the district, published and or transmitted to the Verona Cedar Grove Times and the Star Ledger newspapers, tap into online news, filed with the township clerk, and posted on the district website. Can I have a roll call, please, Mr. DeVita?
Mr. Grandi.
Here.
Mrs. Keegan.
Here.
Mr. Pollack.
Present.
Mr. Marzullo.
Here.
Mrs. Dora.
Here. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to start by welcoming everyone here tonight, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to attend this meeting. I'd like to start the meeting by kind of explaining what will be occurring tonight. As stated in the flyer that went out earlier today, an ad hoc committee was formed several months ago. Anyone from the community was able to sign up and participate in this process. The board would like to take this time to express our appreciation and our gratitude to those who volunteered to be a part of this committee. So thank you. The committee worked closely with Superintendent Grosso to get a clearer understanding of the challenges we face as a district, specifically the challenges surrounding our enrollment increases at our elementary schools and our aging buildings. Tonight, the committee is prepared to present to both us as a board and you, the community. In their presentation, they will be outlining the options discussed and considered and ultimately what their recommendation to the board as the best way to move forward. The ad hoc committee has met separately with the facilities committee, but tonight is the first time that the board is hearing their recommendations as a whole. It's important that discussions and questions regarding the process and the rationale for their decisions are done in a public setting. This referendum is a community referendum. At this time, there has been no decisions made, and the Board of Ed has not committed to any specific plan. So that kind of gives you the outline of what tonight will be like. At this point, I'm going to ask Mr. Grosso to please introduce the ad hoc committee for the public.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. Before we begin, and everybody introduces themselves, just to give a little background, as President Dorr had shared, that initially there was a community forum that took place on September 28th here at the high school. During that time, the community members were broken down into multiple groups in separate areas where they were driven by some pointed questions based on our concerns, particularly at this particular moment in time, based on the increased enrollment in class sizes at the elementary levels. From that point on, an all call went out to the community based on who would like their involvement to be part of an ad hoc committee that really would look at the specifics of what the issues are facing us currently, and the gentlemen you see in front of you are the consistent members of the group that met every single Thursday night for 2 or more hours from October all the way into December. In fact, even into the new year now as well. So it was something that we religiously did every single week and really tore apart all issues, looking at past enrollments, current enrollments, looking at ideas based on facilities, and from there it blossomed into other conversations. And tonight, the These gentlemen will go and explain to you their position as they represent, as the ad hoc committee, they represent the voice of the community. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Joe, and Joe can introduce himself, and everybody can then move forward with that.
How you doing? Joseph Mongello. Thank you all for attending and everyone that's viewing online, and thank you for the board for coming tonight. So I'm going to probably be leading most of this conversation, but there was a lot of us involved, and I thank everyone that was involved. So I'm going to go over a few bullet points, and then I'll go over kind of what our findings were. So as Mr. Grosso discussed, we reviewed the community forum results after that initial meeting. From there, we discussed the timeline and what was needed from that information.
Excuse me, Mr. Mongello, do you
can-
want to introduce the rest
Oh,
of
I'm
the
sorry.
committee first?
Everyone introduce yourself. Sorry. Get it. Make that.
The microphone's,
Just make sure you're turned on.
Make sure you turn on.
Good evening. My name is Craig Forte. I'm a teacher over in Orange and a 42-year resident of Cedar Grove.
Good evening, Brad Bertani. I'm an assistant principal, South Orange and Maplewood, and 14-year resident of Cedar Grove.
my name is Joseph Wood, 10-year resident of Cedar Grove, and I have an associate's degree in elementary education, but no education, qualifications as these guys have. I'm a funeral director, and I have no kids, and I really wanted to be a part of this because I felt that without having any kids, I could have an unbiased opinion on anything.
I'm William Reinhart, lifelong resident of Cedar Grove, and I'm a systems engineer.
And just a little bit more of my background, since everyone else told you theirs, I do commercial project management, so that was my position in this. All right, so just continuing on, so we reviewed there was a demographic study, there was the current enrollment. Mr. Gross represented the 20-year snapshot of the Cedar Grove enrollment, and we reviewed projected enrollment. So we also discussed the new housing developments and the tax, not the taxing, and the capacity of both really the north end and south end, which was a major component in this, regarding space and facilities needs. So when we go through something like this, we're trying to look, we reviewed everything from, whenever you're dealing with major construction, you could deal with basically two far end options and somewhere in the middle, which is where we were trying to live. One option would be do nothing. Other option would be go to an extreme and major construction, meaning brand new schools, completely starting over, which wasn't, overly dived into. We know those are extremes, but I just want everyone to know that we were looking at all options. Where we're trying to live is somewhere in the middle, and we also were looking to review short-term and long-term goals. I know there's a lot of the families here are looking to have a resolution, and talking with some of the people in the township, that is something we feel. Myself, I have two daughters in the elementary school. I also see it. The schools are getting fuller, and we wanted to look at the best way to accommodate the students and the residents and the children of this township, and the best way to go forward with that. So we discussed expansions of, well, let me take a step back. We actually talked about, which didn't last very long, of the short-term possibility being trailers at the elementary schools to try to give us capacity. Problem with trailers, we found, is one, they're not as easy as they sound, okay? They're still commercial structures. They still need all the code regulations, and they're not necessarily cheap. And if we're gonna look at a long-term solution, we wanted to make sure we had a complete plan. We also, when looking at this, did not wanna have to come back to the table with anything. So we tried to address everything needed, all in one package. What we don't want to have happen is we put maybe, let's say, a Band-Aid on it, get us through today, and then tomorrow we're having the same committee saying, okay, well, we resolved it for a couple years, but it really wasn't what the town needed. So we really looked at this as a whole, and to address everything that we think we needed now and in the future. We'd rather be ahead of this, and we'd rather have everything we need now as opposed to coming back to the table. So we went and reviewed the schools. We reviewed North End, South End, and LRP. Not only did we meet, have consistent meetings, which he said 2 hours, and I would say 2 hours was probably light. I think that was the average. I mean, some of these hours went 3 hours plus, discussing all the options with the architect and engineers, and of course, the managers. We discussed, we also toured North End, South End, and LRP to get a feel for what the schools looked like during school hours and what the situations were. So one of the options is expansion of North and South End, okay? Adding on to these schools to give more capacity. Obviously, these are long-term construction, right? So that was one option. The other option was the renovation of LRP, which is a school that we have, and expanding LRP. Essentially, what we came to was the best course of action was what we felt would be the expansion and renovation of LRP for a few reasons. One, if we were to expand and add on to North and South End and do that kind of major construction, it is not something that's going to happen over one summer. Okay, projects like this are going to be more long-term. We didn't want to have the disruption to the students, also the safety concerns with that. And you're going to have a live construction site, and you're going to have not only vehicles and equipment, you're going to have personnel, and it's just hard to manage. So we did feel that since LRP right now is not being utilized as a school, the best course of action was to renovate it, bringing everything up to code, bringing it all up to the standards, and expanding LRP. But also during this committee, what we also started to find was not, and talking about capturing everything, was that there's things that all the schools need. There's infrastructural items, roofs, boilers, etc. There's a lot of items that are needed throughout all these schools, and that's what we really reviewed the capture. What we're trying to do is do the LRP expansion. We think that's the best course of action, expansion of it, and encompassing things like roofing for the high schools as an example. I mean, there's a lot of bullet points, the other schools, there's the boiler projects, etc. It also, part of the discussion in all these schools was when the issues or the concerns from the township were things like special education programming, discussed the art and music programs. We discussed tax implications, which is not my area of expertise, but it was part of the discussion, in trying to encompass all that, so on and so forth. So, and we discussed the costs now and in the future, right? This isn't something that's going to get toned, it's going to be a long-term project. And like I said, we're trying to encompass everything we can in this project. And we had a lot of help from the architects and engineers and a lot of discussion to come to this conclusion.
Can you talk a little bit more about what that LRP renovation and expansion, like what that would look like?
Yeah, so,
Did the committee feel?
and, I don't know how much you could speak to, but, he has the general plan layout, but it is a full renovation of LRP, bringing it all up to code. There are standards and adding on to the school, there's a whole, the roads work in the back, parking, et cetera. And that would be the idea. I don't know if you want to expand on that more if you.
So this is Mr. Dressel.
Yes.
He's our
He's
district
the expert in this.
architect.
Hello, everybody. Yes, Joe, thank you. So the going to LRP, one of the first concerns that we had was access, and we met with the town manager and police department, and they expressed considerable concern about and objection to having primary access to LRP off of Pompton Avenue, aka Route 23. So in order to accomplish safer access and access that would be more conducive to the amount of cars that come at drop-off and pickup times, access from Bradford Avenue was considered, which meant constructing an access road along the west side of the property into the parking lot that's there now. So that was the first genesis of how do we make LRP work as a building in terms of access. Then, through numerous conversations and concerns about what grades would be brought to LRP, the conversation led to having the school accommodate grades 3, 4, and 5 To do that, and to maintain the board offices on the second floor, essentially, we would have to add an 8-classroom addition. And by doing that, we would actually assign 7 classrooms per grade, leaving us with enough space for a specific art room, a specific music room, and a STEAM lab, as well as all of the facility upgrades that would be necessary. LRP is basically finishing up its boiler upgrade project, but then it would involve replacing all the windows, replacing all the unit ventilators, upgrading the electrical systems, lighting, finishes, reconfiguring some of the spaces. Right now, there's 2 rooms that used to be originally kindergartens, I believe. We would divide them into basically 3 rooms, capturing more space. And so you would end up with a 21 classroom school plus small group instruction space and the gym, which is in wonderful condition. The whole building in general is in good condition. It's just a lot of the elements of the building have reached their useful life, and it needs an upgrade.
Can you talk a little bit about the cost savings benefit of
So in that
renovating as opposed to building new?
Sure.
That was a big
New
factor for us,
construction,
too.
new construction, south end and north end. Okay, so as part of that conversation and the complexity of building additions at north end and south end, clearly, LRP doesn't have any children there, so it's a clean site with respect to being able to streamline the construction and not having to worry about the logistics of education, disruption, safety. So it works well in that regard. It also, the addition is a fairly straightforward appendage to the west of the building, whereas at north end and south end, in both cases, we would pretty much be, it could work, but the additions would be very much impacting the existing structure, so those construction logistics would become more complicated as well. Not only adding to those 2 buildings is a construction logistic, but before you even get to that, there are traffic concerns currently, given the number of children at each school. So making them bigger exasperates those conditions. And so part of that construction is, where do we put more parking? How do we have more parents access during drop-off and pickup? So again, falling back to LRP just seems to help make that happen a lot cleaner, a lot more safely, no disruption or minimal disruption, and more cost effectively, because instead of expanding 2 buildings and really tying the new structures into the existing structures, we're expanding 1 building. And the other part of expanding north end and south end with respect to the enrollment is by adding classrooms there, more children clearly, your lunchroom, the gyms that serve as the lunchroom now are at capacity. And so we would either need to add a new cafeteria, possibly, or a new gym, and that was all part of the dialogue, to capture more lunch space, and so then the additions get even larger. And obviously, the bigger the addition, the more costly. So that's what brought us to LRP seeming to be the cleanest, least disruptive, and most cost-effective approach to accomplishing your enrollment issue, which is the first and foremost concern that started this conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, what we had found too was, just reiterating what he was saying, was when you're talking about these kind of expansions at the both schools, there wasn't a dramatic difference in cost in doing north and south end with LRP. So with all the disruptions that would be made to the students, the security issues, and all those coming into play, the traffic, the parking lot, it's another reason we came to this decision. And I don't know how much we can talk about this, and it's hard to give exact figures, but when you're doing a renovation, there's the tax credit possibilities, which when you're doing just straight construction, it does not apply, but when you're doing a renovation, it does, and I'll let him speak to that.
So the state offers, assistance up to 40% in terms of cost savings on, and they encourage you to renovate existing buildings. the percentage of assistance on new construction is significantly less. 100 to $125 a square foot in relationship to what is now about $750 a square foot in terms of new construction costs. So you get more state aid, and they encourage this because they don't want districts to go out and try to build new buildings all the time. The state encourages you to maximize the use of the facilities you have. And so they provide more aid for renovation projects. So in the case of LRP, it's predominantly renovation costs, and you would get most aid for that. In terms of the new construction element of LRP, it would fall back on the new construction percentage aid, but that's a smaller percentage of the overall project as it would be compared to if we were doing work at North End and South End.
Thank you.
So just to clarify, so that the public understands that, so what you're saying is if we renovated LRP, state aid they would provide us up to 40% of the cost.
Of the renovation.
Of the renovation.
renovation.
Yes, correct.
And then anything new is significantly less.
Yes,
Right.
That's up to, it doesn't mean we're going to get 40%.
correct. It's up to
Up to.
40%. And as part of the process, we put together the applications, we come up with a plan of action, we establish some cost estimates, we send it to the state, and then the state makes a determination on that, and they give you a preliminary, what they would call a preliminary eligible cost. And when you get that, it's not necessarily set in stone. If you feel that there's something incorrect about it or something that wasn't considered, you can go back to them and say, to relook at it. They've been pretty good with those calculations, but that is part of the process.
Because then the other thing too is LRP, we're still maintaining it, we're heating it in the winter. It's such an underutilized building that we're still paying for. And it just made sense, not only because of the possible credits from the state, but it's just, it's vastly underutilized.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I've heard solutions, and all this sounds great, but is there any more details you can provide as to what exactly we're trying to solve for? What the enrollment issue is, where we are currently, what the projections are, what we're trying to solve for? I did have an opportunity to read the old demographic study, but at this point, that study is about 2.5 years old. I believe it overestimated what the enrollment would be, especially from the two developments, well, from Hilltop, I guess at this point. And I understand further that it's actually off in terms of the distribution of how that enrollment is going to feed into the different schools. So I'm just trying to understand, before we get into solutions, really what the issue is and what the projected issue is, because we need to understand what the problem is before we can actually start to work on solutions. And that's my biggest concern. If we're going to base our solutions on a demographic study that's 2.5 years old, especially during a time in the history of the town where we're probably experiencing or going to experience, population growth that's you haven't seen in, maybe a couple of decades, I think that's maybe the first step that we need to really get our arms around and understand. So I don't know what discussions maybe you guys had as a group, what data you've been working under, or what assumptions you've been working with. I think that might be helpful.
Demographics are based on the 2010 census. It's not even on the 2020 census.
Right. Right.
So you have to take that into consideration.
So just
working on a census from 12 years ago.
Well, I can speak to that, and I'll share with you all, and I'll also lead you to what points in your binder you can look at. But before we do that, just to answer your question, Mr. Pollack, on the study, I know we've talked about this before. I'm going to let Dan just describe to you a study that, yes, we went out for when this idea was coming to fruition, in which I know there was conversation happening even before I got here. One of the things that we did set out to do is to have a demographic study, and we did see that there was new construction happening. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but I will let Dan begin this, and then I'll talk a little bit, Mr. Grande, for your information, where we currently are and what we're using right now to gauge some of our ideas.
Okay, so I'm just going to take a step back for a second. So when we started this, I think which is a couple years ago now. Should I? Okay. When we, no, I didn't know if it, okay. So, when we started this a couple years back, I think it started with a basis of feel as the classrooms were getting bigger, lunch periods were harder to manage, you were losing art, and you were losing music classrooms, per se. So as part of the consideration, when we began to think about what some of the options would be, the district needed to upgrade their long-range facility plan, your long-range facility plan. So we ultimately did that and got the approval of the plan, which at the time did not include expanding LRP, but it did include, as a projection, opening LRP and using the first floor as classroom space. As part of the state's review of the plan, they actually specifically had said that they couldn't use the demographic study that we had. It didn't come under the guise of the ASSA. There was some technicality with it. In short, they generated projections based on current enrollments and their process of doing that, and then generated the report based on everything we had submitted. In short, based on using a practice of 24 students per classroom at the pre-K to 5 level, based on the state's review of the capacity of the existing buildings, you are short space across the 6 classes, pre-K through 5, 180, just shy of 181 children. So that begins to show you that there is a need for space. And then, since then, I think the numbers have changed a bit, the real-life numbers in terms of the current year's enrollments that have forced you to not have art and music in a classroom at South End, and my understanding is at North End, that's coming down the pike.
So with that, excuse me, with that information, what I'd want to do is, just to start off the conversation, is if you open your binder to attachment C, and that's a 20-year study based off of information from the New Jersey Department of Education Performance Report. And if you look at that, it's a 20-year look from 2000, the 2001 school year to the 21-22 school year. When you look at this, you see that in 2021, our total enrollment from pre-K, K to grade 12 was 1,353, so 1,353. And obviously, if you go up the line, all the way as we go up, you see that the enrollment has significantly increased over those years, over that 20-year snapshot. Now, there are certain years that are higher than others, and you see the ebbs and flows, which are normal in school districts. To just identify some of those larger years, we look at 2009-10, where we have a 1,631 enrollment level. You look at 13-14, which was a 1,663. But then when you go up and down, you start to see it fluctuates between the 1,600 range, anywhere between there, and the high 1,500s. And so at the end of this one was 21-22 school year, you have a 1,583 enrollment. Now, with that being said, if you turn to E, attachment E, you're going to look at a snapshot of our elementary schools. Now, just to be clear, this conversation is starting and focusing around the enrollment at our elementary levels, and that's really what started this conversation. Our enrollment at the middle school, we're tight. We've got your 4 wings. It is tight there, but you also have our high school, which is essentially working at a much less capacity than our other 3 schools. So currently, right now, that's what I was just pulling up just to give you updated information. We're working at 1,593 currently. That's how many students we have in the district, 1,593. So when you look at let's take South End, for example, the 22-23 school year. You'll notice that this is the layout of the school, and you'll also notice that each of those classrooms are broken down by grades, but they're also broken down by how many students are in those particular classrooms. So when you look at this, you still have a vocal music and an art room, but as you start to break away from the gym, auditorium, cafeteria, you're looking at numbers in classrooms that range from 17 in that little corner to 23. So you got 17, 18, 20 to 23. As you work your way across the building, you're seeing numbers that are very representative of 20 to 22. Your lowest number that you have is a pre-K room, and that's 14. And just understand that when we're dealing with pre-K, there are different standards on that, where you're looking at a classroom size that can't reach above 15. So you're looking at that right there. The other thing I want you to notice is that something that's very different that we discussed as a committee is that when you go back to from that 20-year snapshot, you're looking at programming that has changed drastically within all schools in New Jersey, and more specifically here in Cedar Grove. We're talking about special education programs and support programs. What you had 20 years ago, or what was expected 20 years ago, is not what we have today. In fact, our programs are growing by leaps and bounds, and our identification of our students have been growing by leaps and bounds so we can provide services for them. So therefore, with that in place, rooms are being adjusted. So if you looked at the snapshot in 2000, 2001, the plan of South End would not look like this. It would look very, very differently. So if we look at projections, and we go into the next year, 23, 24, you're noticing that there's two options, actually 3 options here. And if you look at the numbers, and these are just projected numbers, and understand that in education, the summertime is an interesting time because you have a lot of move-ins, you got some people moving out, you have people moving from section to section because of particular needs. So these are just projected numbers that were done at the beginning around January. Things have changed since then. So when you look at this, you're looking at numbers that range again from the 22, 20, 23 numbers. Historically, if you go back and you look at Cedar Grove elementary school classroom numbers, they have not been those numbers. They have historically been averaging around 16. And that is what the community has grown to see and grown to know. And in September, I did a presentation to all of you about where we currently were and the idea of a referendum. And when you look at this, and the whole idea and concept, and if you went to, I'm going to skip around a little bit. This is attachment H. There's a slide from that presentation in September that talks about a study from the Brookings Institute. And that's a very interesting study that was done. It was called Class Size, What Research Says and What It Means for State Policy. It was from the Brookings Institute in 2011. I'll just read you this excerpt, which is the reason why, I'm bringing up the class sizes. The most influential and credible study of class size reduction is the Student Teacher Achievement Ratio, or STAR study, which was conducted in Tennessee during the late 1980s. In this study, students and teachers were randomly assigned to a small class with an average of 15 students, or a regular class size with an average of 22 students. This large reduction in class size, 7 students or 32%, was found to increase student achievement by an amount equivalent to about 3 additional months of schooling 4 years later. So it's something that we, in education, we know this, we understand this, but when you go back and you look at the schematics over here of South End, you'll notice that we're above the range of what we're talking about here. So when we look at what could possibly happen next year at South End, you're looking at an option 1 where particular rooms will become special education rooms and art and music will go on a cart. Option 2 is there particular rooms that will go to special ed. One of the particular rooms, which is a large room, which that becomes art and music, which will be a dual room for that. And option 3, where you have 2 particular rooms that are special ed, and 1 particular room is converted into art and music. So you're looking at one option where you get rid of art and music and put it on a cart, which is currently happening in North End, or you start to use 2 rooms that are larger, so you can do a combo deal. Now, when you go to North End, which is currently facing this issue, you'll notice that There is no art and music right now at North End, and it is simply a art on a cart. But when you're looking at the numbers at North End, you're finding class sizes that range anywhere from 17, 18. You have numbers that are 20 and 21 in some of our classrooms. But for the majority of those rooms, you're looking at anywhere between 18 to 19. If you look at the projection for the 23-24 school year, you start to see that those numbers do start to increase. And with that, you're looking at other transitional K-1 programs that have to move to grade 2. So what happens when you do that? That is where you have to go and move. There's conversations about moving those particular classrooms to accommodate those students. So the issue that we're seeing at hand right now is there's a couple things that are causing this, right? So you're seeing a higher influx of new families coming into the community with children. And I know the committee talked a little bit about the new construction. And yes, you do have Hilltop that has been a large part of the equation. This time last year, there were 10 less students on our list of how many kids are entering our schoolhouse compared to this year. But now what we have, and our concern is not necessarily, the concern is the now, but the larger concern is what is going to happen 5, 10 years from now. We have a new construction on Cliffside Avenue. If you go past that area, it is a vast, massive area that they've cleared out a lot of trees. And with that will be the multi-rental units that will be coming into our community, which will probably have children. Cedar Grove is a highly desirable place to live. It's highly desirable for its education system. We saw the uptick on people wanting to come here, especially when North End became a blue ribbon school. So therefore, with that, those are our issues at this particular moment in time.
Yeah, I'm still struggling to get my arms around whether we're viewing this as a need or a want. And I'm only reacting to the data that's put in front of me. And I go back to the study because I think it's very important that the study be up to date and that it's accurate. But this study says, at this point, and this is the conclusion, it appears that the schools can absorb this growth. That absorption has limitations both in terms of available classroom and class sizes. And there are some elementary school classes that are approaching 23 to 25 in size. So again, I'm just reacting to the data, but I haven't gotten my arms around whether this is a need or if this is a want at this point. And that's my biggest struggle with this. And I'm open to, I haven't made up my mind on anything. I'm open to discussion on it and to hearing the data and the facts, but I don't see the data that actually answers that question for me personally. And others on the board might have a different viewpoint on it, or they might be closer to the situation, but for me personally, that's what I'm struggling with at this point.
No, I understand that. And so, I mean, I'm
So-
actually let the committee share that, but before you do say something, I do want to share that. We also looked at some short-term solutions here. When you look at what the conclusion of this demographic study was, and one of that was they talked about redistricting. And so when we look at those redistricting numbers, we're not a large community. So basically, you have a line that goes down the middle of the community. One of the things that we've started to do and look at as we get new enrollments into the community is based on need, grade, and looking at each of the individual sections at each of North End and South End, we are now starting to blur the lines of that line that separates north to south end of town, so it can start to even out the enrollment at both levels. That will only last for so long, as you can see what those numbers are looking like this year and for next year. But I do, Brad, if you
No,
would.
but thank you for that, because that was a question I had on why redistricting doesn't work.
Yes, so
I
we-
did read that.
And it's important to note that North End and South End are different in size.
They're very
Maybe
different in
you could
size.
speak to that a little bit,
Yeah,
as far as
And yeah, you
the
know,
classroom space.
actually, you know, well, Dan, if you don't mind speaking to that, but we'll let Brad actually talk first about your comment on that.
Sure, no worries. I think it's important, so I understand the data, right? We're looking at that, but the data versus real life, I think, is something that's extremely important when it comes to it. So one of the most important things that I think us as a committee did together is take a tour of the schools when the schools were in session, to look at what a class size of 20 or 22 looks like in an elementary school. And it's tight. It's very, very tight. And if you talk to any educator, they will tell you that one of the most important things about education is differentiation of instruction, small group instruction, etc. There's no space in these classrooms for that when the class sizes are where they are now. So I kindly ask the board to take that tour to go in there for part of this decision-making process, because data is one thing, but real life and what you're seeing in the schools completely changes what that data actually means. And one of the most important parts of that is going in, I know that North End alone, if you go into that media center and you look at what that media center is broken up into and how those students are learning. So you have a big space, about half the size of this, right? That's broken up, and you have students that are learning speech and possibly ELL, but they're in an environment like this. So if I'm talking and I'm teaching, do you think that another student who's learning speech right over here, or English as a second language right over there, is able to really understand and get the instruction?
Over a small partition.
Right.
There's no clear boundaries. So if, if a child has special needs and, say they have ADD, well, if somebody 5 feet away from them is talking, they're not going to get the appropriate education that they should because of the environment that they're in.
May I?
I think good.
I was just gonna have Dan explain about the size.
Can I just throw something out real quick?
I truly believe there's a need. I'm at odds of how we get to that end. I want to look at the educational components and the value of adding on to certain buildings and how those buildings enhance the educational programs that you're going to present, not just to house students, but how do we enhance the programs? Also, I don't know if we've taken a lot of consideration into the idea that there is a possibility of a mandated preschool.
That was
We
something
talked
I was
about
just going to bring
that's
that up.
that's
Literally on the
legitimate.
same page.
That's a legitimate concern coming out of the State Department.
Yes.
Now, the first question I would ask is, does any of these solutions that you're putting forth, would they be able to accommodate preschool? And the way preschool is calculated, to my understanding, when I worked for the State Department, is that you take the existing kindergarten, double the kindergarten, take 90% of that group, and that's going to be your preschool number. And that's limited to 15 students in a class. So you have to take into consideration all of these things. The other thing I'd like to add is that if you're going to spend these kinds of funds to enhance your school district, I think that it needs to enhance programming. Why wouldn't we build something that's going to enhance the music program? It's going to enhance our art program. Why are we looking just to house people? That's a big thing in my mind of doing this. And at a later time, I'll discuss what my thoughts are. But I do think that a combination of what you've discussed is probably the best road. And I have been a superintendent and a principal doing major construction projects. So I know how they work, and it can be done. And I look at the short-term inconvenience versus the long-term value. All right? Yeah, you're going to be inconvenienced for a while. But look at what you're going to have in the back end. You might have an art room, you might have a music room, you might have a new gym, you might have extra classrooms, you'll have the resource centers, okay? And if you look at the prices that are on these documents, all right, they are in the ballpark and somewhat cheaper. And the other component to that is you may not need a road, all right? The township might be recommending that, but I would think that you refurbish LRP and you do something else with it, all right? And I think that other grades would go there, and that's for another discussion with the board, all right? But the academic piece is important. So when you evaluate building and going to bond and going to referendum, you need to look at the educational component, the fiscal component, all right? And what the long-term implications of what you're going to do is, all right? I've been here my whole life. I've been through all the 3 referendums, and I can tell you at some point in time what history has done and where we're back to. And we really need to look at it in a more global sense educationally as well as fiscally. That's my 2 cents for the evening.
Well, and I think the committee touched upon that in the beginning about the long term, right? We're not looking for a Band-Aid, something to
And
a
it's not a new
short-term
problem,
fix.
it's not a new problem that's,
Right.
it's a problem that's been looked at before, but kind of has been passed along, and now it's here again.
But how could we discuss a referendum and with any solution and then go back to the public saying, by the way, we don't have enough rooms for preschool.
Yeah, we can't.
I can speak to that.
Yeah, good.
Dick, you guys sit down.
Oh, sorry.
Rick, I know you wanted to say something. Do you want to say
Do you
something
mind
before?
if I just start it?
Sure.
Sure. So to echo what Mr. Palick was saying about programming, one of the things I noticed when I walked through the classrooms was many of the classrooms are very tight. They're very hard to get from one point to another. And as a sixth grade teacher, I know we have to break them down into the small groups, it's part of the Danielson model. So as we look at that, we begin to realize that we're actually lacking in the programming that we need to do because we don't have the space to provide for that programming. I walked into one particular classroom, I just about fit into the back area as that teacher tried to break it into groups and do small group instruction. And as we know, that is a movement in education to go ahead and do small group instruction. That wasn't just one classroom, that was many classrooms across different grade levels. From the first grade to the second grade, I have a second grade daughter. I happened to walk by her class and just poke in. I didn't go inside, I just looked kind of inside, and I was kind of curious as to how they were going to be able to break them down. So I think to really do this, we have to open up space throughout both school buildings and be able to go ahead and give that space to those teachers. Many of these classrooms are tight. They're smaller than the classrooms I teach in.
And the
So-
teachers are doing yeoman's work.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeoman's work.
100%.
All right, and they are differentiating instruction, they're building on programs. But if you want a top-flight education program, you have to give the educators the tools and put things in their toolbox that they can use. All right, and right now, the facility is handicapping.
Absolutely.
Right, agreed.
That was what I wanted to
Agreed.
say.
And I just want to,
Thanks,
before
sir.
you jump into this, is just for the public and for the board, you know, when we toured these schools, this wasn't just a quick stop in, look at a room. We spent, about an hour and a half at each school, and we went to multiple classrooms. So when it comes to needs or wants, we're not talking about, hey, this would be really, like a cool thing to do. This isn't we spend time in these schools and you could see it. Now, my background is not as an educator, but I do have children in this school. I also had discussions with, obviously not everyone in the township, but a lot of the other parents in my school and the other school. And everyone has the same kind of comment. What's going on? Why is there art on a cart? Why is the media center crammed? This is Cedar Grove. This is not what this was supposed to be. And this is not something that was born last year. This is a slow build. I think COVID, I think, everyone moving out of the cities, the hilltop and all these expansions, absolutely are a contributing factor to this. But this was a slow build and we're here. And I think at the end, the cups runneth full. Yeah, maybe we're trying to put 8 pounds in an 8-pound box and we're at capacity and can we make it cram? But we're going to be at 10 pounds in an 8-pound box soon. And at that point, we're going to have a real problem. And what we're trying to address here, I want everyone to understand that we were given a task to review this over the past 5 months and come up with the best solution possible. And this is what we came to. I do believe this is a need. Again, this is going to come to the decision of the board and then the township and the members of this community. But when we looked at long term, when we looked at LRP, I would rather expand these schools and give you LRP. We even discussed this. Well, do we need how many rooms? Can we get with this? I'd rather see there be 2 rooms that are, maybe a little underutilized right now and not have to have this meeting again in 3 years saying, okay, well, now we did this and now we have to come back to the table. We're trying to sustain something here that is a long-term solution. I think a lot of times, you get sticker shock with these. And trust me, I fully understand it. I just want everyone to understand that when we address this was not addressed in it doesn't matter, let's just throw money around. Nobody wants to, just spend money willy-nilly. We're not trying to waste anybody's money or time, but what we're trying to do is give a complete solution so that we are not coming back here and then in 5 years or so saying, why wasn't this addressed? We're trying to encapsulate all of it, and that's how we came to these conclusions. And I know after you get through this part of it, I do want, if you could discuss the facility. I did mention it about the facility issues, roofing, et cetera, because there are issues we looked at in discussing this with the architect and engineer, and I thank him for all his time, we were like, wow, we got to incorporate all this because we're going to end up in a position soon that we're going to have a real issue. So, sorry.
No, thank you. And Mr. Powell, just to kind of piggyback onto what you were talking about with the preschool, I could definitely speak to that. So just what Joe was talking about is very interesting. I mentioned this back in the September meeting. This is not a new concept at all. In fact, it was first introduced to Cedar Grove Board of Education in November of 1998. and the issue of overcrowding at the elementary schools was the product of Memorial Middle School, right? So this has been something that's been going on for many, many years, and here we are sitting at the table again. But to your point, when you talk about preschool, Mr. DeVita, myself, and Ms. Pignatello were on the Essex County Pre-K expansion project, along with Rutgers down in Rutgers in New Brunswick through NEAR. And we are a select group of administrators that are having conversations with the state based on what is going to happen if the state of New Jersey does make pre-K universal. Right now, it's just done on, they're not calling it grants anymore, they're calling it free stream of funding or something along the lines of that, but it's grants, right? But the reality of it all is that we have a lot of questions because one of the things they've talked about, and one of the major concepts that those who do participate in this now, is that you don't necessarily need to have the space in your current school buildings, which I probably would guess to say that most school districts don't. You're absolutely right. We did a whole formula for ourselves to see where our students would be. We're looking at around 120 students that would be in preschool. If we were to do the expansion of LRP, which with the reduction of classrooms at both North and South End, you're looking at an average of 7 classrooms that then can go back to offset the overcrowding and then leave more space, but we're also looking at programming. You also look at taking away some classroom spaces at the middle school for programming. But one of the things the state does talk about, and it's currently being done, is that if there was a pre-K expansion or universal pre-K for the state of New Jersey, what would happen is that we have 4 preschools in our community. We would reach out to those community preschools, and they would be funded through state financing, so they could take on and incur the overflow of what we don't have within our own schools, which would not be a lot of room, you know. But that is how they would. That is how the state looks currently right now to offset the overcrowding of preschool students. So we're looking at around 120 students, or 116 students, which is probably around an average class size of what we have here in Cedar Grove currently right now. But there's pros and cons to all of this,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
You know, so I mean, I'm not going to go. I mean, I could sit here for hours talking about preschool and funding and pros and cons. But just to let you know, each school district would not have to incur the space issue as what we initially thought when we were going on this meeting. Had a lot of questions about. It would be farmed out to our other 4 private schools that then take on class sizes that would.
But the reality would be that the community would expect that you would house your kids. You're not gonna have 50 in district and 50 out of district. You're gonna have to be in a position to
Well, no-
see how you want them to.
Well,
go.
actually,
I would,
that's what the state does
That's what
expect.
of course they
The
do.
state expects that. Yeah, that's what they expect.
but that's just a
Yeah, no, I listen,
concept
and
we
it-
gotta discuss.
And I have to tell you, that is absolutely something that we all did discuss, because we, you know, just what, you know, the committee said, we don't want to have to come back to the table again 3-5 years later and say, oops, you know?
Right.
So this is definitely, you bring up a really good point, and that's something we've definitely discussed. Someone said they wanted to say,
I think Dan was next.
Yeah,
oh,
Joe, we'll talk about the facility petitions.
yeah, please.
Yes, so one of the major components of work that needs to be done at North End, South End, and the high school are roofs. Maybe 10 years ago, prior referendum took care of portions of the roofs, but there's a good balance of.
Dan, can you just, excuse me, can you just talk
Oh,
into the
sure.
microphone?
I'm
so
sorry, I
that-
was trying to address the.
So people at
public.
home
I'll
can
put it
hear as
over
well.
here. You got it. So there's a good balance of the roofs that they're approaching 25, 26 years old, and they need to be replaced. There are currently leaks at each school, and unfortunately, roofs are not inexpensive, so they're a major component to the facility improvements. HVAC systems, electrical upgrades, parking lot improvements. What else did we have?
Air conditioning at all elementary schools?
The air conditioning at, I guess that was a 2-pronged approach. We're considering air conditioning just the multipurpose rooms, and then considering air conditioning the balance of the classrooms. LRP, I think we were considering that right from the get-go, because all of that equipment needs to get replaced anyway.
Drop off at high school.
Drop-off lane at the high school,
Auditorium roof at the high school.
or that's the section of, the lower section with the science rooms and the auditorium. And you recently had completed a beautiful auditorium renovation, but the roof is aging, and I wouldn't want to see what you've done already get ruined. Thank you for the help on this one. I couldn't remember everything. What else did we have in here? Oh, so those were, so just in terms of facility upgrades, because we're losing, the weight room at the high school, expanding, we looked at actually putting an addition on, but then came up with a less expensive plan, which would be expanding it into one of the adjacent classrooms, as well as creating a life skills space in the current black box room at the lower end by the auditorium. And then lastly were athletic considerations, which was a separate item that we've always kept on the side, but in particular, you'd be losing a field here as a, excuse me, we're not at LRP. At LRP, you'd be losing a field at LRP as a result of the addition. So we would try to rework the fields at north end to create an additional ball field and capturing the field that you lost, you'd be losing at LRP. What else did we have? And throughout, there is asbestos abatement concerns at each of the buildings, but most importantly, LRP, which another, positive thing about that, if you could put it that way, is the fact that there aren't children there, and that work can happen without children having to occupy the building. I think that covered it.
Some of my experience has shown, and what do you think about, some of those items, I believe, can be handled through capital expense. If you budget appropriately in the right way, you don't have to go into bonded money for that.
Absolutely. One of those in particular are the boilers at the high school, which we had in this list at some time ago. The list, if you have this binder, that list was generated in September, and actually those, just so when you look at these numbers, those numbers are older than September of 2022, so we have to adjust those estimates. But in particular, as you bring up the boilers at the high school, we had in there as part of the referendum, but it's going to be done through an incentive program through PSE&G over this summer. So the district is capturing some of those funds and not having to put that work into the referendum work. There may be other items such as some of the parking lot improvements. The roofs are approaching, the millions of dollars, the $5 million range if we look at them comprehensively. So that would be a big number to budget as a capital improvement, but you certainly could.
Some of your internal HVAC can be handled through capital expense.
Yeah, so the HVAC, if we separated out the HVAC work, for example, with respect to just the gymnasiums in North End and South End, they're more, those are more numbers that you could sort of absorb. We were looking at maybe $300,000 for the HVAC, plus about $300,000 for the electrical upgrade to accomplish that, which, a little north of $500,000 at each school. But again, that's a number that you could sort of manage back into a budget if you really wanted to.
And just to remind the public that anything we do with LRP, because of the way the facility's being used now, has to be brought up to current code, right?
Right.
Whatever existing code is at the point in time of construction, that's gonna have to be the code that the project's gonna call for, correct?
Correct, yes. There are some nuances to that, but in
Right,
general,
but
yes.
in general,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So it's usually in the electrical, the fire. and
Yes.
all that.
And I think an important part of LRP that we looked at too was that right now it's kind of dead money, right, for the district. We don't want to give up space. We don't have a lot of space.
Agreed.
Yeah.
We don't have building space. We don't have, right? So we don't want to give that up. But right now, it's not being rented out anymore. So being very creative, we have different things going in. There's a show, I think, that was filming there, things along those lines. But you have to look at the offset of that, right? So it's dead money going to positive. So taking that off the books as well.
Dan, may I ask if hypothetically, if the board office was not there, would we need the expansion of the building?
So.
Would there be enough classroom space with the second floor and the first floor?
So the quick math on that is that upstairs you have about 8 classrooms. If you rebuilt it the way, renovated it the way it was built originally, you'd have about, and we're looking to add about 8 classrooms. So the short answer is yes. If you didn't have the board offices there, you wouldn't need the addition.
So we
But-
had also talked about that as well, but then where does the board offices come?
Right.
There's no,
Right, so that was one thing we did look
Were
at.
you able to discern the room utilization components of here at the high school?
Yes.
Yeah. So-
We were actually.
Yeah.
Because
We spent a lot of
those
time on
rooms
that.
are used at about 60% capacity during the day.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think that was one of our longest nights.
Right,
4 hours
right.
on that
We
one.
tried playing the shell game if we moved here and there, and I think Mr. Gross was gonna speak to it more, but it is something we looked at.
Yeah,
We tried playing that.
What was one of our initial ideas of doing that was going and bringing all administrative offices to the high school and really looking at what would best suit the needs and be least disruptive to the student body in their classes, which we looked at the oldest part of the building, which was the E-wing. And we looked at, that it in itself would cost money to renovate for access because at the board office, we're having visitors coming in and out all the time. And so how would you deter that from mixing with the regular population of students? So yes, so, when I originally talked about, to Mr. Grande's point of where, what are our issues right now, the high school is not one of them because the high school is really basically working at half capacity right now, facility-wise. It is very convenient for the staff to have each of their own classrooms, et cetera, which is a unique opportunity for high school teachers to have and for students to be able to know that this is a Spanish room or this is the math room, et cetera. Could that be done? Absolutely, but there's a cost attached to that as well. So when we look at this, we look and say, okay, what is the most economical and long-standing way, and something that's sustainable. So yes, this is definitely something we discussed even prior to the committee coming on board as well. In fact, we actually talked a little bit about that when we had our own conversations when you first came on.
And I think just to reiterate that a little bit too, is what we don't want to do is, again, you make these kind of moves and changes, and then you've kind of alleviated one situation, but you just caused another problem, right? So this committee, we were trying to address was solve the problem, okay? And give us what we need, to accomplish that. So yes, we did look at all these things, and I want everyone to know that we try to exhaust every possibility, but again, we don't want to just cause, a problem in one area while fixing another.
Yeah, good. Close
Okay.
You can open it to the public.
Yep, at this point, we are going to move to the public comment section. The Board of Ed recognizes the value of the public comment on educational issues and the importance of allowing members of the public to express themselves on school matters of community interest. Public participation shall be governed by the following rules. Please preface comments by stating your name, address, municipality of residence, group affiliation. Please be mindful of your statement length. Keep each statement to a 3-minute limit. Participants may not speak more than once on the same topic until all others who wish to speak on the topic have been heard. Please direct all statements, questions, or inquiries to the presiding officer. The presiding officer may interrupt, warn, or terminate a participant's statement, question, or inquiry if it's too lengthy, or abusive, obscene, or maybe defamatory. These rules may be waived if necessary to protect privacy or to maintain an orderly operation of the board meeting. Okay, with that being said, do we have anybody that would like to speak tonight? Just come on up. State your name and your address, please.
Good evening. Stacy Keena Molinaro, 16 Highfield Lane, Cedar Grove. My only question is, putting the elementary school with the board office, what's the security risks? Like people coming to the offices, letting people in, like what's the disadvantage of having them in the same building?
Just for clarification, if you don't mind, you're talking about what is the security risk of having LRP be a like if you were saying an intermediate elementary school.
Well, like the board office is there, so people come there during the day, other adults come there.
Right.
Like you don't come to South End or North End unless you're there for a reason for North End and South End. Now you have outside facility, outside people coming, like what's the disadvantage? Like how are we making sure the kids are safe and what are we doing? Are we doing anything extra? Like what other sort of stuff is doing to keep the kids that are there safe? Because now there's another purpose for people coming to the building.
Absolutely, and we've discussed this, and, one of the things that we talked about was, we're very adamant about this prior to the committee, and then also with the committee, is that whatever the current elementary schools have, security-wise, is exactly what we would want for our, potential new building. The other piece of this is that there would be a clear distinction and access between the board office and the school itself. So there would not be easy access to get upstairs. See, if you want to come to the board office to meet with me, you would not have access to that lower part of the building. The building also, we have to look at it as well, as you'd have to be ADA compliant, elevator, and access. So we've taken all of those pieces into consideration, because like we said, if you go into North End, South End, and if you went to LRP, we'd want you to have the same experience, but also understanding that it would be dual usage, and therefore, there have to be distinguishing characteristics so that you wouldn't have free-flowing traffic.
Thank you. Anybody else? Name and address, yes.
Michelle Moriello, 51 Bennett Ave. What kind of special ed programs or academic programs are going to be enhanced by this construction? And I have a few questions. Is that okay? All right, and then has there been any study done? I know that you guys looked at the traffic on Route 23, Pompton Ave. But has there been any study done at the traffic for the middle school? I don't know if anybody sat in that line. There's a lot of traffic there, so. And what about the space at the middle school when all of these, because of, the overcrowding at North End and South End, go to the middle school? Will the middle school be able to handle that capacity?
All right, those are great questions.
Yep.
We could tag team. it
Yeah, we
over
could
there.
all tag team with this.
Go ahead.
I'll start off. Do you want to start off?
Well, I could talk about the special ed programs. If, again, the board is we're not saying that we support this recommendation today, but space in general for special education programs is very important, as most people know. So a lot of the programs that are driven based on student need, right? So that dictates what type of programs are needed in each building based upon the needs of the students. So, and that's federally mandated, so we have to provide that. I know in the talks of a referendum, we've spoken a lot about increasing the small group instruction rooms where we can utilize more of our RTI, which is, pre-intervention, response to intervention, which is pre-special education intervention, with the hope to reduce the need of our special education referrals and students that are in need of that type of service. Basically get them sooner, right? Get to them and intervene prior. So there has been a lot of talk in some of these, in these different scenarios of increasing that space to provide more of that. But as far as the special education, the big one that we can speak to ahead of time, because we know, is our high school program, our 18 to 21 program, which we call our progressions program, which right now are working out of a classroom. These are our students, our own students that are 18 to 21, as well as tuition students that we receive from neighboring school districts, which is a revenue for us. And right now they are working in very small classrooms, inadequate spacing. And so that is definitely something that would be needed in the referendum or in the whole plan to address those needs, and whatever else is needed. Being in special education myself, the influx of students with needs coming in is growing tremendously, primarily in the preschool levels, and a lot of that is pandemic, early intervention. They'll probably get mad at me for saying this, but basically shut down during the pandemic, so the students coming in are, you know, in need of a lot of services. So it's really a long story. It's really student-driven, but right now, as the needs are arising, we don't have the space to make those programs. And so that's how programs get enhanced, right? Where we have students that are, we're not fitting students into a program, we're creating programs to fit students. And so that's the big part about the special education and the need. I can't speak to the study. I do not believe there was a study done at the middle school. It is challenging, but it seems to work somehow. I don't think we've done any study on the middle school, or have we?
No, no. You know,
Traffic study.
yeah.
Yeah.
Part of that.
Oh,
Yeah,
hopefully.
Part of helping at the middle school is that you would be pulling fifth grade from the middle school building and bringing it to LRP. So by subtraction, you would be helping to address the congestion. And the same thing goes for the north end and south end. By bringing third and fourth grades to LRP, you're gaining space by removing those grade levels from the building.
I think that was the part that might have been missing from everything, was the shifting of the grade levels for the school. So if, I don't know.
And
wanna
Mr.
go
Grosser,
over
if you
that,
want
just
to
kinda-
go over the layout.
Yeah.
Yeah, the layout
To
of each one.
clarify, I think the recommendation that the committee is making is that we would remove the fifth grade out of the middle school and make LRP a 3, 4, 5. So you would take a whole grade level out of the middle school, and correct me if I'm
Yes.
wrong, but
Yeah,
this
that's
is
correct.
my understanding of what you're recommending. And then you would take 2 grade levels out of the elementary schools, and then you would have a 3, 4, 5 at LRP.
So, and just to piggyback on, there are a lot of academic advantages of doing that. When you're looking at grades 3, 4, and 5, you're looking at a more centralized way of delivering instruction to those grade levels. It's a great transition to the middle school, even for the third graders with expectations. I could certainly speak to that. I've been part of that. I was a teacher in that arena. But you know, also, you know, just to Dan's point, when we're talking about the reduction of traffic around, I mean, that is horrible. I mean, I've been trying to get, I sometimes try to get into the middle school. I'm sitting there for 20 minutes to try to get in there. It's horrible. But I know from our local police department, this has been something that they've dealt with for quite some time, and I know they're not happy with the situation. But, you know, there's a lot of benefits to just some of these small little pieces that would help to relieve some of that pressure on some of our current conditions. Even at the elementary schools, we talked about this. Parking in general, as a parent going to a middle school, the elementary school, there's no parking. I know when I've had to go there for certain events, I'm parking, if I'm down by South End, I'm parking close to Route 23 and walking it, you know? So there's a parking issue even for our staff members there. So you're looking at a reduction, which would help to relieve some of that pressure that we've talked about at the current levels as well. And, you know, just to piggyback on what President Dora was talking about, even with special education, one of the things, and I love that how you said it, that we build programs around children, right, and their particular needs, is that, you know, something historically that has happened here in Cedar Grove, and it's not just unique to Cedar Grove, but it's all over the place, is that when you don't have space or a way to accommodate the students, you look to go to outside resources for that, and that's when you look at out-of-district placements. And when you have the capability of providing those services for students that live in town, in their own district, by creating and opening up that space, it is extremely advantageous for that child, for both their academic and their social experiences with their own peers. You brought up our community-based instruction program, our progressions program. Just to give you a little idea about that, is that forever our students in the 18 to 21 realm, they were in out-of-district placements. But because we had the space and we were able to maneuver and rework and reimagine what that is, our students who live here, they have the advantage of going downtown and going to those stores and working in those places. So if we could do that for our students at the upper level, there would be that goal to try to bring that to them, with the possibility of an expansion to give that to them here. And as a parent of 2 children in special education myself, I would you know, that's something that I would definitely want to have. And as an educator too, we've talked about that, so.
Hi, Patricia Montana, 5 Emery Court. First, thank the committee for all your time and work. I had a couple questions, in no particular order. The first was, is the public privy to any of the foundational documents that are in this binder? So for example, are we able to access the study on enrollment or any other materials? Because I too am interested to learn more about the underlying data. I was trying to take notes as Mr. Grosso was speaking, but it seems that enrollment has dropped over time, and I guess I'm trying to understand what the projections are for those numbers going forward. And I think those are my main questions. So what are the projections, and what information can the public look at in making their own assessments if a referendum is to be put forward? Oh, and I thought of my third question, which was cost. What is the cost? What projected cost? Has that been part of the discussion? Is there information that will be shared with the public? And I'm sure the public is interested to know what implication that is for an individual community member, resident. Thank you.
So this is a process. We're in the beginning stages of the process. Like I started our meeting tonight, this was the first night as a whole that the board is hearing this information. And we will start to have those conversations. And Mr. Edelstein, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but as the process moves forward, that information can then be presented publicly.
Well,
Or maybe not.
a demographic study, for example, is an operable document. It could be, you could get it tomorrow. And that's true of some, thank you. That's true of some, but not all of the documents we're talking about. So each one would have to be looked at. And it will be a board decision, I suppose, whether they wish to have people Oprah documents piecemeal, or whether, for example, they wish, as some districts do, to put the demographic study on the website. But, yeah, the short answer is most of the documents that are being discussed are available to the public at some point, for sure.
And we will be as transparent as we can.
Make them available.
Legally, and, like I said, it's a process, and as each step of the process goes, we will bring forward to the community so that everybody knows what's happening and make the decisions that's, is best for them. We are a little off topic, but we're working on a social media platform for the board, and so information will, once it's up and running, will be provided there as well. So we want to get the information out as accurately and cleanly and neatly as possible. Did I answer all your questions? Oh, the cost. That was the second question, cost. I think at this point, I don't think we're prepared at this point to speak of a cost, because we don't really have a set plan. I think once the board has come to a direction, I think at that point, we'll be prepared to share that as well.
Somebody else had a question.
Yep, come on up.
Hi, my name's Nicole Nutile. I live at 14 Ridge Court. Thank you all, superintendent, board, committee, for all the work you put into this. I know not everybody has a lot of time these days, but I do have a few questions for you. Sorry, I wrote them down. When you did the projection on these enrollments, what was that number? Like for Hilltop, maybe the new housing project, what is the increase? Because I Googled what it was for enrollment now, let's say 2023 or the current year, and 4 schools are at like 1,600 kids, something like that. So what's the projection for those 10 years with these housing projects that are coming in that we need to understand? Children, just overall. I have a few, sorry.
You have this, right?
I could speak the best I can to that. So overall, when you're looking at Hilltop, like I opened up the conversation where we have currently 89 students from Hilltop. That's 10 more than we had this time last year. So you have a lot of young families that have moved in, and a lot of those families are in baby carriages when you walk through there. So there's a lot of children. But over the next 10 years, you don't know essentially what the influx would be. It could go down or it could go up, right? What we're seeing overall is a trend that it is increasing. Now, when you're looking at the Cliffside Avenue project, you're looking at around, what did we say that? How many units was that? That was around
300,
four.
I think it was 387 units.
It's let's just say it's close to 400 range. Don't quote me on that. But you have a large amount of units that are rentals. So when you have that, now you have the enticement of not necessarily owning, but being part of the community and wanting to take advantage of the school system. So when you're looking at that, there is an obvious uptick in what the projection of enrollment would be. And to kind of paint a picture for you, we just recently did our preschool lottery in our enrollment, and it's been the highest it's been in many, many years, where we had around 77 participants that came in and wanted to be part of. How many positions that were available? 9? 9 available positions in the pre-K program. So you're looking at an increase there. So none of us have a magic crystal ball to say, oh, this is exactly what's going to happen. But one of the things that we do know, and Ms. Montana, this helps answer part of your question as well when we look at projections, is that, you may look and say it could say 1,600 for the next 15 years. But the issue that we have as a district is that our programming is increasing. So when I talk about that, you can't specifically look at just the number. You have to look at the programming that's involved in that. And what I talk about that is that, we brought in a lot of our ABA programming for our students, and one of the things we have to take into consideration is that next year that will be up into 2nd grade. So that will grow, and then it'll go into 3rd grade, and then we'll go into 4th grade, as well as looking at the specific needs for our students. President Dorr talked about our multi-tiered levels of support. So it's not just looking at the number as a whole, it's looking at the programs and the room usage within each of those buildings and how that detracts from the lower class size. That's really what it comes down to. That's what we're looking at. So I can't give you an exact number of where we'll be in 5-10 years. We know that the trend is increasing. We know that there are years in the past 20 years that have been much higher than other years. But we do know that the room usage based on our programming is increasing, which is causing the reduction of space and higher levels of classroom attendees.
And those rooms will have to be done throughout the different schools if we split up the grades. Like AV, if it's 2nd and 3rd, it'll have to move from, it'll have to be in all elementary and then in
Right, so
the additional
one of the things
schools.
we're talking about doing, we just received our projection numbers last Friday, is our programming in South End and North End, and will it stay the way it looks like this year? Or will we just move programs particularly to South End and just North End to help condense that bubble of growth that we're seeing? So we're trying to do some is what Joe was talking about, some Band-Aid pieces right now with what we're able to do with the space that we have. But eventually time will run out on that, and that's what has caused the influx of room usage and the detraction of the art and music room at North End. And that will happen next year at South End, partially, possibly.
Yeah.
What Mr. Grosso's saying is that, and he's right on point with it, is that the facility and room usage is exasperated by the idea that there are certain mandated requirements for the number of students in certain classes. And if you have that particular class in your building, and the mandate is only for 8 children or 11 children, the room is still going to be utilized for that program. And really, the influx of how many students you have may not be the true number of how many rooms you need.
Right.
And I think that's what he was trying to, really get at.
Yeah, no, that was exactly, so thank you. For the committee, have you benchmarked with any other schools in the surrounding districts that have run into similar issues to see if they approached it with similar or the two ways that you're looking to do, and heard of their successes or challenges, to see how you can better or make the two options you proposed more efficient, more effective for when it comes to Cedar Grove?
I mean,
Well, I'll just give the main point.
Yeah.
Most districts don't have an empty school building.
right.
You know, we have, I will say this, and we've had this conversation, I think, you know, the Board of Education has done a wonderful job of keeping that building as part of our community, and not selling it off or turning it into something completely different. I can certainly speak to, and maybe some of the gentlemen here can speak to this in their own experience, but I've been part of communities that have gotten, have released their buildings from their lineup, and they've had to go back out to the public again to rebuild when they had that building sitting right there, and it's turned into a Y or something else. So I think one of the most, I think the largest advantage that we have here is we have a piece of real estate where other surrounding areas don't have that at all.
I'm from Bluefield, so I
Okay,
we
okay.
have the north-south end.
Yeah.
We had
Yeah.
that
Me
for
too.
many years.
But, oh, good, you go.
Oh, no, please.
No, I just wanted to say too that, I've been in Cedar Grove for over 30 years, and I think a lot of members here have been here for a long time. Cedar Grove is a sought-out town. I was from Bloomfield myself. I moved here in 3rd grade, to give you a little background, and I remember moving here saying, "Oh, I'm going to get out of this town," and now I can walk to my childhood home. Okay, so I think a lot of people come to this community. I think it's growing, it's expanding. People stay here. Part of it is it's a great town. The school system has always been good, and that is why I think a lot of people want to come here. So, in my position, just from what I've seen, without being an educator and such, people want to come here, and the town of Cedar Grove is not the same town it was 30 years ago. It is expanding. There's a lot of development because there's a sought out, and people want to be here. You see these homes expanding, so I don't feel that we're going to go. All of a sudden, we're going to wake up tomorrow and say, "Wow, we have 20 classrooms open." I think it's only going to get worse. I think we're just going to get, more people are going to move into this town. I think a lot more people are staying. Their families expand, and that's what we're really looking at. And that's what this committee was about, was the perspective of people that have lived here, and whether there's children in the schools or not, people that have been involved in the town, and especially myself. My daughters are in school, and we do see it. And again, if you remember my opening statement, there is the option of doing nothing. And there's the option of doing something. And this is going to come down to the Board of Ed and essentially the people of this township. And whatever decision is made will have to be lived with. But, I feel like doing nothing is not really the answer. But again, it's not my decision, it's my opinion. I'm not saying how anyone should feel or expand, but from what we found from living here is we're not going in reverse. And, I hope that answers your question a little bit
Yeah,
from
and I think the
from a
work that you
parent.
guys have done is great, and we appreciate it.
I just want to add something to that. In addition to what Mr. Mongello was just saying, as taking the tour through the school really was an eye-opener. Walking into some of the classrooms and going to a point where you literally just have to squeeze yourself in to fit in the room does have an impact on programming, as Mr. Palick was
Yeah,
pointing
I'm
out
sure it's
before.
alarming for
It's a
parents here, too,
huge
knowing
impact.
that.
I mean, I work in Orange
So tight
as a
in
6th
there.
grade teacher, and I have more room in my little classroom than some of the teachers have right now to be able to do the
Yeah.
small group instruction.
We want the best for our kids, so.
Right.
I mean,
So one of the things to consider as we go through the process is if projections are going to go up, that's only going to get worse to a point where we're going to put the kids.
Right.
So,
And,
that's kind of something to consider.
Again, from a perspective of a parent, right, and I'm not talking about laws and regulations for these schools, but just as a, making something work. I would jokingly say, my father went to school uphill both ways in the snow with no shoes too, right? So making this work is, will we survive without things like air conditioning, and if we're crammed in school? Maybe, but every generation we're trying to make it better for the next. And this is the progressive step.
I feel very confident you guys will make the best decision. The only last thing I have to, when is the next housing project going to start, going to be completed? Do you have any idea on that?
So I've attended, Ms. Keegan and I have attended the town council meetings, and from what we understand, is that the next round is 2025. So we have Hilltop, we have Cliffside, and they're anticipating the next round in 2025, which is not far away.
Will they also get $1.2 million every year? Will they donate it to the district?
We don't know, so that you're referring to the,
Yeah,
Hilltop.
I mean, we have a revenue sharing agreement.
no, I think you're saying an additional.
In addition
For
to
Cliffside.
Hilltop, right.
So,
Yeah.
so no municipality in New Jersey has any legal obligation to share pilot money with a school district. It's purely a negotiation. So I suppose one would have to wait to see if there are pilot funds, and if so, how much. And once you know that, whether the housing is going to produce kids who are going to go to the school district. So all those factors would go into that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you for coming.
Anybody else? Okay. So, oh, beat me to it.
Emmanuel Cornelio, 96 Anderson Parkway. So knowing that our town is growing, and that was eye-opening, another development in 2025, have we thought of actually giving the board its own building so we don't have to deal with safety concerns of, people coming in? If we move them to the high school, to one of the schools, it's still the concerns of outside people coming into the schools.
Yeah, yes, we definitely have looked into that, and we looked at the advantages and disadvantages of it. One of the things that we talked about initially was moving the board offices here to the high school.
But it's
are you
still
talking about a separate building?
A separate building.
Oh.
Yeah.
So we don't have to deal with those concerns.
Oh, wow.
I mean,
Yeah,
when we,
see, that's a lot of money.
right.
Actually, you're
think about it.
Yeah.
Brad,
look
you're
at the back.
absolutely right.
Town offices.
Yes, we actually looked at and we explored the bank. Well, it was the old Bank of America,
there?
right next to
Bank of America.
LRP. And by the time we looked at it, it was
sold.
It was gone. So trying to find real estate, I know like Glenridge used an old home, right? Certain places use other real estate. I know there's the building, was it called the Glass House, the Glass Building?
Can we build something behind North End? I mean, we have a lot of space back there.
And then you lose
It's actually where it used to be.
What
It's
field?
where it
Yeah.
used to be.
Hold on, there's a part of the field that's really unusable, right? That's all the way to the left by the school, right? It is a play, but it's not a baseball field, it's not a basketball court.
Yeah,
And
well,
there's still ample space, I think.
I'm sure we'll have options that we'll be discussing, brainstorming outside the box. And that'll be definitely one of the thoughts.
and just to answer your question a little bit too, remember I said we went to the two extremes. One of the things we did look at, so everyone understands. Now, when I say looked at it, no, we didn't lay out plans and schematics, but we were just looking at it from mapping issue. It was like, what if we were just to build a brand new south end, as big as we need it to be, a brand new north end, as big as it needs to be. But there's a lot that goes into that, and the cost obviously is much higher. But we were looking at completely new buildings and then maybe repurposing these all. Where we came to this LRP was the best option, the most responsible, while giving us all the expansion we have. But I understand your question about the schools.
Still go through the LRP,
Yeah.
because we need that, right?
And then
But
add a
also, so
school
we don't
onto
run
it,
into
yeah.
this issue
Every other
5,
building,
6,
yeah.
7 years from now, where now we have, the board in one of the school buildings, just give them their own building. Doesn't have to be as big as a school, right? It'll be smaller.
Sure.
And then if the town grows more, it's easier to move board people around in
Mm-hmm.
offices than it is to move from school to school.
Yeah, that's,
In many districts, that's more common than you would think.
yeah.
That is how they house their boards. In
Separate
a
buildings.
building, in a separate
Exactly.
location away from the schools, yes.
Yeah.
That is a concept that we will have to take a look at, especially when we look at all the plans.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question, and I have a
If you
couple of
could just
comments.
state your name
Yes,
and-
I will. Affy Lamptey, 40 Pine Drive, Cedar Grove, New Jersey. I'm an educator, 22 years. I've been through this with Wayne, Maplewood, which is where I came from. My husband's from Maplewood. And as you know, I'm sure you can talk to what's going on now in district.
That's good.
I do have a question about LRP. Piggybacking off of the gentleman that spoke before me, if you move the board offices, currently they're on the second floor, correct? Put classrooms up there. Does that have an elevator?
No.
That's an additional cost
Yes.
because you need to have an elevator.
That is part of the plan regardless of whether it's classroom space or.
That would be included.
It will be included, yes.
Okay, I just
But
wanted
is
to.
it? Let me say it this way. That is what we've been talking about. Until the
Yes.
board formalizes the plan, it is certainly something on the table.
So that it's accessible to all students, especially those who have mobility issues. Also, the other question that I had, well, commented on, South Orange Maplewood, that might be a great comparison to discuss. They don't have any extra buildings in the district. They had to expand all of the elementary schools, I believe, at this point. When they were talking about doing the major renovations throughout district, they had a slideshow. And the community was able to see what Plan A would be, all the numbers, what it meant, projections. Is that a possibility for us to see it visually? Because I think now we're discussing something, but we don't have a number. And at the end of the day, it comes down to dollars and cents, right? Nobody really wants their taxes to increase. Me, if my taxes increase and my kids get what they need, I'm fine with that. But I know everyone's not in the same boat as I am. So I think putting together a slideshow once you get to that point with the various plans, Plan A, Plan B, Plan C, and what they would cost so that the public can compare and make an educated decision. Because right now it's kind of abstract. 'Cause we're not seeing what you're seeing.
So to answer your question, as I said to Ms. Montana, we are in the very beginning stages of it.
Yes.
And so the process of getting a referendum passed must include all of those things you just mentioned. So a simple answer is yes, all of those things will be. There will be opportunities, evening events. We will try to meet as many needs as possible to get the information out so that the community has a clear understanding of the different options considered, the cost factor, the implications. As much as, everything that we can give you, we will give you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Last call. Anybody?
Doug Hill, 78 East Bradford. So I've been here 6 years, and I grew up in Montgomery Township. It was the #1 or #2 public school in the state when I graduated in '97. We had 120 kids when I graduated. We had first we expanded the elementary school, and they said we would never have to expand again. 4 years later, we expanded the middle school to have a lower middle school. 6 years later, we built a new high school. The elementary, the middle school and high school I was once in became an elementary school. So I graduated with 120 people in '97. Within 10 years, we had 700 kids per class. So you guys, with these new schools in these new towns, in the new developments you guys are having, you will have more referendums. I guarantee it. So if you want to expand this, I would say expand LRP as much as you can, and just do modest modifications to the existing schools. I have a background as a master's degree in mechanical engineering with 25 years of military construction projects of over $30 million I've worked on, from design charrettes all the way to punch lists. So if you guys need my assistance, I'm willing to give it. My area is more in R&D ballistics, but building a school is cake compared to what I've had to work on with explosives. If you want to work on, I suggest in September possibly moving the Board of Ed to, now that the town has built 2 county buildings in town, see if they have spare space. Or along by Grasshopper, there's a bunch of empty buildings that look like they're partially empty. Maybe you can rent their space. Or also look at, this would be for the architect, if the first floor, if you could put a second floor on the first floor, if you could add to a second floor onto LRP. if the load-bearing walls can contain it. Building up is cheaper than building square footage and foundations. That's all I have.
We had talked about adding second floors to the elementary schools. So that was a thing that we had thought of too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so
All right.
we'll close that portion of the meeting.
If I could just say just one thing publicly.
Absolutely.
Again, I want to thank everyone that showed up here, and I want to thank everyone that's viewing this. And what I encourage is, these links, and share this information with the public. We absolutely want to be transparent. We want you to understand where this came from. This is 5 months to get to this point. And I don't think, I can speak for myself, but anyone else, we're not walking away from this. It's just, we're at this phase of the project. But, please share it. We want your perspective on this. So thank you for who showed up. Thank you for who viewed online.
Okay, and I'd like to thank you all again.
Committee.
for,
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we look forward to continuing to work together.
You're stuck with me.
You too. Okay, can I have a motion to convene into an executive session?
Second.
Okay, so the board will now convene into executive session. There is no plan on any resolutions to follow. Our next meeting is next Tuesday. Will be at the middle school. 6:30 is closed session, 7:30 is public session.
May I make a suggestion? Why don't you move into executive session and at the same time adjourn the public portion of the meeting?
Okay. Well, I'm just moving into executive so I can just adjourn.
No, you just need a vote to adjourn the public portion of the meeting.
Can I have a vote to adjourn public? Can I have a motion? So moved.
Second.
I don't have to do roll call, no?
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Ms. Sadie,
Thank you, everybody, for coming. I really do appreciate it.